Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another triple header book review. And we're going to be discussing the final book I have to discuss for this series, because there's only 2 books. We're going to be discussing book number 1. Now, from memory, last time I read a book from this series, it was the second book, and all of them kind of had their own equal negatives for me that kind of brought all the stories down to that same grade I gave all of them. I think like a 3.5 out of 5, and the book came out to be like a 3.5 out of 5. This one I think is a slight improvement overall, and I think that for it being the first book and going from this to the second book, I can kind of see why Triple Header got the axe and they stopped making these. It's just because the stories, after reading this, I'm kind of confident that the stories kind of suffered in quality and there really wasn't that much effort put into them. But one thing I really appreciate about the series altogether is how well the stories were able to get fleshed out over like the Tales format, and I still prefer this format to the short stories than Tales. And for this book, I think I have a personal favorite out of the whole series. These stories in this book were pretty fun, if I'm not going to lie. These were pretty fun ones for what they were. There's a really high point, there's another solid one, and then kind of the low point of the series, in my opinion. And this book is all over the place, but this one was a fun one. And if you haven't read this, I highly recommend trying it. This series is not worth skipping or anything. I would definitely recommend getting your hands on these just to try them out, especially if you're a fan of like short story formats. And plus has a really cool holographic cover on it that you can see. If it glares in the video, I'm sorry. But yeah, try this one out. I think there's at least 1, maybe 2 stories, and maybe all of them might impress you. But yeah, give this one a read if you haven't. So, in the Triple Header series, there's 3 stories. And in this book, the 3 stories we're going to be discussing are Ghost Granny, Spin the Wheel of Horror, and Teenage Sponge Boys from Outer Space. So the first story, Ghost Granny, this one was probably my favorite of the whole book. And it takes place in like this house setting, and it surrounds his family. This girl's the main character. I think her name is Kelly. And that's like the only character I can remember from these stories here. But anyways, Kelly and her family, you kind of learn from Kelly that her family has been living with this woman living in their attic for many years. And she goes by the name of Granny Deaver. Now the thing is, Granny Deaver is not their real grandmother. Granny Deaver is like a friend of their grandmother's sister or something. And somehow, one day, since her family was so nice, she showed up to their house and just never left. And the story kind of goes into how Granny Deaver just makes their lives miserable. And Kelly kind of shares some things about what things that Granny Deaver does and how mean she is, and like how she loses her teeth in the milk, and how she insults the kids at dinner and constantly scolds the family for things they do and stuff. And this really upsets her, and she's getting to her breaking point because this has been going on for years, and she kind of hints that her and her family have to constantly put on this act around this woman. But one day, Granny Deaver's revealed to be dead. She died, and they go to her funeral, and nobody really liked Granny Deaver. She didn't have much friends, and nobody really showed up to her funeral. And Kelly... There's some pretty honest monologue with her character in this. She's like, I'm not sad to see her go. I'm not going to miss her. As messed up as that sounds, I'm really not going to miss her. And plus, my birthday party is coming up, so finally I might be able to have a good birthday without her ruining it, since she's ruined the past few birthdays I've had. So, after the funeral, the family gets home, and there's a grisly discovery. When they get home, the ghost of Granny Deaver, after the funeral and after all this, I guess the processions and stuff is over, they come home, and it's revealed that Granny Deaver's spirit has risen from the grave and come to haunt the house. And Granny Deaver's appearance is grisly, okay? She has her eyes retreating into her eye sockets. She has green skin. She can fly. And she's still the same old Granny Deaver, just mean. And she reveals to the family that she doesn't want to leave. She wants to stay because she still has a lot of things to do. And of course, this gets in the way of Kelly's plans for her birthday. She's like, oh, great. Well, now Granny Deaver is going to ruin my birthday. But the family's like, okay, we'll try to deal with that, and we can still have your birthday party, and hopefully everything will be all right. So Granny Deaver goes back up to the attic, and there's some moments in the story where Kelly is kind of reflecting on in her monologue of these things that Granny Deaver, even as a spirit, is continuously doing, like poking fun at her and stuff, messing with them at breakfast time. And one day, I think it was the day before her birthday or the day of her birthday, Kelly explodes onto the spirit of Granny Deaver, saying, "Go away! I don't want you here. You make everyone's life miserable, and we don't want you here." And this is after Granny Deaver kind of revealed to her in like a one-on-one conversation that she made some friends in the graveyard while she was a spirit, and she realized that she doesn't want to be there with those people. But she also kind of reveals that the dead stick together, and she kind of made some friends there at the graveyard, which comes into play later on in the story. So Kelly tells her to leave, and Granny Deaver leaves. And before that also, there was some things going on with police getting called about Granny Deaver just howling at the night because that's what ghosts do, and she was claiming that she was howling because she was bored and stuff like that. I thought that was pretty funny. And so Granny Deaver leaves, and Kelly has her birthday party. And while she's having this birthday party, Granny Deaver comes in screaming and roaring and scaring everybody out of the party and causes this huge ruckus. And Kelly essentially doubles down on her anger for Granny Deaver and just keeps standing up to her and says, look, and it's because she finds out that through standing up to Granny Deaver, she becomes weaker. So there's this big climactic moment where Kelly just keeps standing up to her, and something may or may not happen to the spirit of Granny Deaver. And after the situation resolves itself, the story ends on a twist where maybe there's some unexpected guests showing up at the house, and I'll leave it at that. And that's how Ghost Granny essentially goes. This one I thought was a really fun one. I think this one is probably my favorite short story in the Triple Header selection. I thought this one was really great. The second story is called Spin the Wheel of Horror. This one's easily my second favorite of this book. This one is surprisingly fun. So there's this family that's obsessed with this show called, I think it's called Spin the Wheel of Horror. It's like this game show that they see on TV where these contestants and these are put into this weird situations, and if they don't scream throughout the entire segment, they win $100,000. And the cast and the host dress up like monsters themselves, and it's all part of the experience. So one day they get this call saying that they need to go if they want to be on this show. So they get in the car and they head down the road, and they're following this map because back in the 90s there was no like MapQuest, there was no GPS, so they had to use a map. And they're riding down this desolate road, and they follow the directions, and then they get stopped by a police officer. And this police officer is said to be this grotesque looking creature, and he doesn't talk, but they ask him, they tell him that, hey, look, we're sorry we got pulled, we were kind of speeding a little bit, but we're trying to get to this venue where they filmed the show, this game show. And the officer kind of hinted on where to go, and they peel off and they leave the officer behind. And of course the kids are like, that's kind of weird, why didn't the officer talk, and why does he look so weird? Maybe he's part of the whole gag. So they finally find this road, and they turn into the road, and then they're escorted inside, and they follow this dark path, and it looks kind of weird, but they just go with it. And then they show up on this stage, greeted by this host dressed up like, I think, a werewolf or something. And they look out into the audience, and they're all dressed up like monsters. And they're like, is this Spin the Wheel of Horror? And they're like, yeah, this is the game show, and you guys wanna and they do. They, I'm trying not to spoil this because this leads into near the end of the book. But essentially, the game show host kind of like psychs them out with something, and they're like, "Are you sure we're on this show? Are we on the right show?" And they're like, "Okay, let's just go along with it. Let's just do it." And the mom's kind of freaking out a little bit, which segues into the challenge they have to do. So the challenge that the TV host presents them is that they're put onto this set, which looks like an abandoned hotel. They're in like this uh, foyer area with a bellhop bell and an elevator, and there's like a creepy elevator attendant with like a half human looking face and a half melted zombie looking face. It's really creepy to think about. And they're in this hotel, and the kids get separated from the parents. So the kids, when they get separated from their parents, they decide to go down the elevator because that's like the only place to go in the whole room, and they have to avoid this uh, elevator bellhop, which they manage to escape from, but they send the elevator crashing down to the basement floor. And while down in the basement, they realize that the basement's covered in this green, slimy goo, and there's a pool covered in this. And the only way to walk is through this little side area of the pool that's also covered in this green goo. And while in the dark, uh, they're greeted by some monsters, okay? And they get freaked out, and they have to try to escape the monsters and try to figure out how to avoid sliding into this pool. And after this whole ordeal kind of wraps up, they end up finding their parents, and they try to find a way out of this basement that they're both stuck in. Somehow the parents got down there through this trap door or wall or something that brought them down there too. And while they're trying to figure it out, these monsters chase them, and the kids fall into the pool, and they fall into the slime, and they keep falling and falling and falling, and then it cuts right to the stage. And um, essentially, essentially, while when the family arrives back on the stage, they're like, okay, so back to the psych out from earlier. They do the host does this psych out, and I'll give you a hint. It has to deal with like being like fried or baked, and it has like a cooking element to it. And they ask them the question, and then they proceed to take them on into like this kitchen area, and there's this like big oven thing, and the family doesn't wince at all. They're too petrified to scream. And then something happens. They may or may not have won the challenge. And after that reveal happens and everyone's excited, there's this twist reveal that comes out of left field where something may not be all that it seems, and somebody meets a grisly end. Let's just put it that way. And that's Spin the Wheel of Horror. Yeah, I was trying to figure out a way not to spoil that one. Sorry if that one came out kind of mildly choppy with the overview. But I don't want to spoil it because it's really funny. And then the final story is Teenage Sponge Boys from Outer Space. And this one's clearly like the weakest one in the book to me. Arguably the most bland of the whole series. Maybe next to like The Mummy with My Face from book 2. But I think that one might be slightly better than this one. But anyways, this boy is, I forget his name, but there's a main character and he's a boy. And he starts off the story with a monologue that he likes to like take things apart. And a lot of people find him to be a weird kid. He's kind of an outcast. And one particular day, it's not really a special day or anything. He's getting late to go to school, so he has to go grab his best friend, who I guess is his next door neighbor, and he goes over to her house, and she's revealed to be this girl who just likes to sit downstairs all day, if she could, and watch the Weather Channel. She's like obsessed with the Weather Channel, and that's like her shtick throughout this whole story, which is kind of annoying. But yeah, she's obsessed with the Weather Channel, and he's trying to get her up to go to school, or they're going to be late. And something happens in the basement where they get a little sidetracked, and then now they're definitely going to be late. if they don't get a move on it. So he has to literally drag her from watching the Weather Channel. She gets ready and they both leave. But then while they're walking, just like basically speed walking or running to school to be on time, they hear this loud crash and then a big earthquake happens that lasts for a couple of minutes. And they're shook by this and they have to go see what happened, and they see smoke billowing from the woods, so both of them head into the woods to check it out. And as they head into the woods, they're greeted by this mysterious fog or smoke, and once the girl realizes the gravity of the situation, she's like, okay, we got to get out of here, we got to get to school. But the boy calls her back, and they both discover that what's there is like a mossy green tint, and the smoke is coming from somewhere, but they don't know where it's from, and it might be best if they just get out of here and come back later after school to check it out. So they head to school, and they sneak into class while their teacher is writing something, and they sit down thinking they got away free, but the teacher then announces to the class, 2 of you were late, and I want you to admit who you are. So the 2 feeling guilty, they stand up, and she's surprised. She goes, oh, there was 4 of you late. Oh, well, I'm really disappointed in you 2. I expect more out of you. And the boy and girl look behind them, and there's these 2 twins named Dirk and Deke who are new kids. They're like tall, lanky, skinny kids that are kind of weird looking and don't have many friends. And the teacher basically says to the 4 of them that they're going to have to stay after school and write an essay about punctuality and stuff. And also as a punishment, they're going to be called up to the front of the class to do math problems. And while they get called up to do math problems, the boy, he's not really good at math, but the girl is, so she's doing her problems. And the boy looks over to Dirk and Deke and sees one of them make an error on the chalkboard, but then he erases the chalk with his forehead. And he thought that was very weird behavior. And he kind of mentions it, later on after school, when the whole situation ended, and it kind of does a little time jump. It's kind of weird how it jumps there. But it said that they stayed after school, wrote their essays, and he tells the girl about what he saw. Then they have this encounter with Dirk and Deke where they get essentially dragged into the woods. And then Dirk and Deke essentially reveal that they're aliens from outer space, and they reveal that they were late coming to school that day because they were trying to get their spaceship flying, and it crashed. And then they show the girl and the boy the spaceship, and at first they're marveled, and they're like, oh, cool, that's awesome, your secret's safe with me. But then the twins, the 2 boys, then do this really gross out scene where they squish in their heads. It's really creepy to think about, and then it kind of deflates back. And they kind of give a revelation that Earth is kind of dangerous for them to be on for too long, because it's like a water planet, and some of the things in the environment are really harmful to them. So essentially they need the boy and the girl to help them fix their spaceship. So because they're not familiar with Earth technology, because the space technology they have is broken. They also reveal that they are teenagers who have gotten their intergalactic space license, and they're just joyriding through space, and that's how they crash landed on Earth. So they're basically guilted into or forced into helping them for 3 days straight, staying up night after night, not working on their homework, helping these boys try to fix this spaceship. And on the final day, the boy and the girl get fed up. They don't want to keep helping anymore. They feel like they have to stand up. But for that day, the boy needs to grab a battery for the aliens to put into their spaceship to finally send them off. So he has to steal a car battery out of his dad's car. And there's this whole thing where they meet up late at night, and they go into the garage, and they try to take the battery out of the car. And there's this big thing where they wake up the parents, and the dad comes out, and they say, oh, they're just working on an astronomy project, that they won't be too much longer. And after the dad goes back to bed, they take the battery out to the woods, and it's revealed that the boy character, he's kind of mentioned this throughout the story, that he's not good at putting stuff back together, but he's good at taking stuff apart. And he tries to tell that to the aliens, and the aliens take that he's not trying to help, and it squeezes his hand and turns his hand into sponge fingers. I don't know. That's just the thing they do. And then he's like, okay, I'll put the battery in, I'll try. He's like, and they're like, good. And then they clap their hands twice and turns his hand back to normal. I don't know how that works, but let's just roll with it. And essentially, he puts the battery in, but accidentally keeps a bolt in his hand. And then the big revelation drops about what's going to be done with the boy and the girl character, whether they might stay on Earth or leave with the teenage Sponge Boys against their will. And the girl character gets this idea to stall them, and stall them for a good reason. And while they're stalling, the Sponge Boys are getting upset and more angry. They're like, come on, we have to go. And then eventually it starts raining. And use your imagination, or just read the story, but I'm not going to spoil anything about that. It starts raining and something happens. Now when this thing happens, the two characters get the idea to maybe or maybe not just go ahead and put them in the spaceship, or do something with their bodies. I'm not going to spoil what it is. And something may happen to the spaceship, and the situation may seem like it's going to get better for these two characters. So the story ends with the two bidding farewell, and the main character, the boy, realizes the gravity of the situation when he sees something happen, and he clicks something together that, oh, I messed up. And that's essentially Teenage Sponge Boys from Outer Space. So yeah, try not to spoil that one too much, but that one's pretty easy to spoil. So yeah, off the bat, all these stories were kind of fun in their own ways. I liked, I think, Ghost Granny the most. I think Ghost Granny was easily the scariest. It was the most tragic, sad, emotional, fun, all in one. I think it was the best written. For Ghost Granny, I gave a 4.5 out of 5. And I really only deducted 0.5 off, because I only do 0.5 increments for compendium short story collections like Triple Header or Tales. But I only deducted 0.5 off because I feel like there's something missing there with the twist to me. I feel like there could have been a better setup to make it a little more, I don't know, shocking. Because that setup was done so early on that that information with Granny Deaver was said so early on. I kind of figured that was going to be the twist. And when we got the twist, I'm like, okay, the twist is kind of predictable. I kind of wish there was something else with the twist to kind of spice it up to make it not as predictable. But that's really my only negative. Honestly, I really dig this story. It's a genuine highlight of the series. Spin the Wheel of Horror. I think I'll give this story, I'll be more fair on it. I'll give this a 3.5 out of 5. I think this one is about on par with the other three from book 2. I really dug this one. I thought it was funny. I thought it had some really fun, gross moments. But I do have a negative with it, and that's actually the ending. It's funny, but I think it kind of takes away from the entire experience as well. It feels like one of those lazy twists that Stein just throws in. Like, oh, can't trust these people. It's a typical twist commonly used in Goosebumps. And for something as fun-feeling as this, I was kind of hoping for a more game-oriented twist. I think that the twist ending just doesn't do this story justice. And honestly, if I'm not going to lie, the story kind of drags a little bit with the whole running around this one particular thing. I was hoping, since it was a game show, it was going to have multiple set locations. It just had a hotel lobby in the basement of the hotel lobby with like an old mucky pool. That's all it was. And I was hoping for a little more than that, unfortunately, and it was kind of a disappointment. But a 3.5 is about fair for this. Now, for Teenage Sponge Boys from Outer Space, I think this one is definitely the most flawed one. I like Dirk and Deke. I like their characters. I like the body horror dealing with their heads and stuff. Some of the suspense really slaps well, but some of the things about the girl character are flat out annoying. How she's constantly talking about weather, and it's set up to be a tool to use at the end, and I don't like that. Both characters are one trick ponies. And I'm not trying to take anything away from the other stories because I think, Kelly from the first story, she had some depth to her. Spin the Wheel of Horror was like that. You had more than one character to care about. You had like 4 characters. Mom and Dad were pretty active. And yeah, there's a lot different going for that I can let a lot with that one slide. But for this one, the girl being obsessed with weather was just really annoying to me. She just always filling up page space with banter about weather stuff and facts and stuff. And I could tell that the boy character was getting annoyed. And then the boy character himself, he was kind of frustrating too. They both just were like, trying to get rid of the sponge character, get out of sight and run away from him. I don't think they really had the greatest plan there. And honestly, if they knew about the whole rain, like the potential weather stuff that came later on in the story, like water, rain, stuff like that the aliens hinted to early on in the short story, I don't see why they had to wait for weather to occur to use that against them. It just makes no sense. And the whole thing about them touching his hand and turning his fingers into sponges and then clapping their hands twice and turning it back to bone, really doesn't make sense at all either. Like, why is that an ability for an alien? So you're telling your alien can turn cells into sponges and then clap and turn them back to human cells? That's like magic. So they're magicians too? It's ridiculous stuff like that. The story's like pretty much filled with weather banter and stuff like that. Just needless dialogue. It stretches way too thin. I think this is easily the weakest of the short stories in Tripleheader, and I gave this one, I think, to be fair, a 3 out of 5. So with all that taken into account, I think overall I'd give this book a little bit more of a fairer score. 4.5, 3.5, 3.0 kind of blend together into something I would probably give like a 3.7 to 3.8. I'll go ahead and give this book in total about a 3.7 out of 5. This is a pretty good book, kind of average. You're going to get some out of this. You're going to get some maybe lesser, maybe some more than maybe I did. It's just a good, solid book for what it is. The stories all mixed together. I think Ghost Granny really carries this book. And yeah, it's just a good average one, in my opinion. And that's all I really can say about it. Also, I did not mention Lefty, Righty, and Slim, but I think I will include them more in the story ranking video. So stay tuned for that. They do have some funny moments in here, and you might get a kick out of that. I just don't feel like I need to comment on that when I really don't care to begin with. So yeah, but yeah, that's my thoughts on Tripleheader Book 1. Let me know down in the comment section if you have read this book. Which story is your favorite? What story is your least favorite? And do you love this book or do you hate this book? I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.